Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The first time my parents questioned my money, I was 23. Where did you get that watch? Mom asked at Sunday dinner, eyeing the modest Seiko on my wrist. Saved up, I said simply. Dad snorted. On a secretary's salary? Right. My older brother Kevin laughed. She probably maxed out a credit card. Classic Emma behavior. I said nothing. I'd learned early that defending myself only made things worse. The watch had cost $200. A reward to myself after my first consulting contract paid out $50,000. But they didn't need to know that. They thought I was Caroline Winter's executive assistant. Technically true. What they didn't know was that Caroline Winters was my business partner, and our cybersecurity consulting firm had just signed contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. You need to be more responsible with money, Mom continued, cutting her roast beef with sharp, precise movements. Your brother is a financial advisor. He could help you budget. Kevin nodded sagely. First step is admitting you have a problem, sis. My sister Ashley chimed in from across the table. I manage a whole department's budget. I could teach you some basics. I appreciate the offers, I said evenly. She's hopeless, Dad muttered. Always has been. Remember when she wanted to study computer science? We told her to get a practical degree. At least she's employed. I'd graduated with a degree in information systems. Practical enough, apparently. What they didn't know was that I'd also completed a master's degree in cybersecurity at night, paid for entirely by my growing business income. That dinner was 5 years ago. The pattern never changed. Every family gathering became a referendum on my financial literacy. When I wore something new, it was irresponsible spending. When I traveled for work, it was wasting money on vacation. When I eventually bought a modest 2-bedroom condo downtown, the interrogation lasted 3 hours. How did you afford this? Mom demanded, walking through my new home with suspicious eyes. I saved and got a mortgage, I replied. True, though the mortgage was technically just for show. I'd paid cash but set up minimal financing to avoid questions. The interest rates must be brutal, Kevin said, examining my kitchen with the superiority of someone who owned a McMansion in the suburbs. You should have consulted me first. Ashley ran her finger along my countertop. These are granite. You could have gone with laminate and saved thousands. Dad just shook his head. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Living beyond your means. This will end badly. I served them coffee in my too expensive home and said nothing. What they didn't know was that my modest 2-bedroom condo was in a building where I owned 3 other units as investment properties. What they didn't know was that my consulting firm had grown to 15 employees. What they didn't know was that I'd just been featured in a tech industry publication as one of the top 30 cybersecurity experts under 30. I kept my success hidden for a simple reason. Peace. My childhood had taught me that anything I achieved would be minimized, questioned, or attributed to luck. When I won a science fair in middle school, Dad said the judges felt sorry for me. When I graduated summa cum laude, Mom said grade inflation made degrees meaningless. When I got my first real job, Kevin said I must have known someone. So when my business began succeeding, I built it quietly. I used Caroline's name as the public face. I worked from home or coffee shops. I dressed modestly at family events. I drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic even though I could afford any car I wanted. And for 5 years it worked. Then my grandmother passed away. Grandma Rose had always been different. She'd built her own real estate business in the 1970s when women weren't supposed to do such things. She'd believed in me when no one else did. You've got that fire, Emma, she told me once during one of our private lunches. Don't let them extinguish it. She'd known about my business. She was the only one I'd told. When she died at 89, her will was read 2 weeks later. I sat in the lawyer's office between my parents with Kevin and Ashley across the table. The attorney, Mr. Patterson, cleared his throat. Rose Anderson's estate totals approximately $3.2 million, including property, investments, and liquid assets. Kevin leaned forward. Ashley pulled out her phone to take notes. My parents sat straighter. The estate is divided as follows, Mr. Patterson continued. To her son David Anderson and daughter-in-law Patricia Anderson, the family home and $200,000. Mom smiled. Dad nodded approvingly. To her grandson Kevin Anderson, $150,000. To her granddaughter Ashley Anderson, $150,000. My siblings grinned at each other. The remainder of the estate, approximately $2.7 million, goes to her granddaughter Emma Anderson. Silence. Then chaos. That's impossible, Dad said flatly. There must be a mistake, Mom added. Kevin stood up. That's absurd. Emma can't even manage her own finances. Ashley's voice went shrill. She probably manipulated Grandma. Elder abuse. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. Mr. Patterson raised his hand. I assure you Mrs. Anderson was of completely sound mind. She updated this will just 6 months ago, and I have medical evaluations confirming her mental competency. This is fraud, Dad declared. We're contesting this. That's your right, Mr. Patterson said calmly. However, Mrs. Anderson anticipated that possibility. She left video testimony explaining her decisions. Show us, Mom demanded. Mr. Patterson pressed play on his laptop. Grandma Rose appeared on screen sitting in this very office, looking directly at the camera. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone and my family is unhappy with my will, she began, her voice strong and clear. Let me be crystal clear. I am of sound mind. I am not being manipulated. And I know exactly what I'm doing. She leaned forward slightly. Emma is the only one who inherited my entrepreneurial spirit. She built something from nothing just like I did. The rest of you have good careers, stable lives, and that's wonderful. But Emma has that fire. She understands risk, reward, and hard work. My mother made a strangled sound. To my son and his wife, you have everything you need. To Kevin and Ashley, your inheritance will supplement your already comfortable lives. But Emma will build something extraordinary with this. Just like I did. The video ended. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Dad stood abruptly. We'll see about this in court. The lawsuit came 6 weeks later. My parents filed a petition claiming undue influence, mental incompetency, and fraud. They demanded the entire estate be redistributed fairly, which meant equally among all 4 children and grandchildren. Kevin and Ashley joined as co-plaintiffs. I hired Eleanor Vasquez, one of the top estate attorneys in the state. She cost $850 an hour. My parents had no idea I could afford her without touching the inheritance. They're going to make this ugly, Eleanor warned during our first meeting. Family court cases often are. I know, I said. They'll attack your character, your finances, your relationship with your grandmother. They'll paint you as a manipulator who exploited an elderly woman. Let them. Eleanor studied me. You're very calm about this. I have nothing to hide. The discovery phase began. My parents' attorney, a slick personal injury lawyer named Marcus Webb, requested extensive documentation. My financial records, employment history, communications with my grandmother, everything. I provided it all. Every bank statement, every tax return, every email and text with Grandma Rose. That's when things got interesting. Marcus Webb called Eleanor 3 days after receiving my financial documents. Your client's tax returns show income of $23 million annually for the past 7 years, he said, according to Eleanor. We believe these are fraudulent. Eleanor laughed. I assure you they're not. A secretary doesn't make $23 million. Ms. Anderson isn't a secretary. She's the co-founder and CEO of Sentinel Cybersecurity Solutions. Long pause. That's impossible, Marcus finally said. I've sent you the corporate filings, business licenses, and client contracts. It's all legitimate and properly documented. Another pause. The plaintiffs were unaware of this. Clearly. Marcus cleared his throat. This complicates their narrative. However, it also raises questions. If Ms. Anderson is so successful, why does she need her grandmother's inheritance? This suggests greed. Or, Eleanor countered, it suggests her grandmother wanted to support the family member who actually built something, rather than those who simply expect handouts. We'll see what the judge thinks. But Marcus Webb wasn't done. The following week, my parents amended their lawsuit. The new petition claimed I'd hidden my wealth to make Grandma Rose feel sorry for me. That I'd pretended to struggle financially to manipulate her. That I'd committed fraud by concealing my business success from my family. None of that is illegal, Eleanor explained. You're not required to disclose your finances to your family. But they're trying to paint you as deceptive. What do? We show the truth. All of it. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Margaret Chin presided, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and an impressive reputation for cutting through nonsense. My parents sat on the left side with Kevin, Ashley, and Marcus Webb. I sat on the right with Eleanor. The gallery held a few curious onlookers and a court reporter. Marcus Webb presented first. Your Honor, this case is about manipulation, deception, and exploitation of an elderly woman by her granddaughter. He gestured at me. Emma Anderson systematically isolated Rose Anderson from her family, fed her lies about her own financial struggles, and convinced a vulnerable woman to leave her nearly $3 million. He pulled up photographs on a screen. These photos show the defendant's lifestyle: a luxury condo, expensive restaurants, designer items. Yet she told her grandmother she was just getting by as a secretary. Actually, I'd never said I was just getting by, but I didn't interrupt. The defendant concealed her true financial status, earning $23 million annually, to appear needy and sympathetic. This is manipulation, plain and simple. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Kevin looked appropriately outraged. Ashley shook her head sadly. Marcus continued for 20 minutes, painting me as a calculating con artist who'd exploited Grandma Rose's affection. Then it was Eleanor's turn. Your Honor, may I call the defendant to the stand? Judge Chin nodded. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Eleanor approached with a calm, confident demeanor. Ms. Anderson, did you ever tell your grandmother you were struggling financially? No. Did you ever ask her for money? No. In fact, she offered several times over the years and I always declined. Did you hide your business success from her? No. She was one of the few people who knew the truth. We discussed my company regularly. Eleanor pulled out a folder. Your Honor, I have emails, text messages, and phone records showing extensive communication between Emma and Rose Anderson. The topic: business strategy, market analysis, and entrepreneurial advice. Rose Anderson was actively mentoring her granddaughter. She projected several emails on the screen. From Rose Anderson, so proud of your latest contract. $7 million is extraordinary. You're building something special. From Rose Anderson, your approach to the government sector is brilliant. I tried that in the 80s and never cracked it. You're smarter than I was. From Rose Anderson, when you go public I want to buy the first share. Smiley face. Marcus Webb shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor continued. Ms. Anderson, why didn't you tell your parents about your business? I took a breath. Because they've spent my entire life telling me I'm financially incompetent. Anything I achieved was dismissed or attributed to luck. I built my company quietly to avoid their interference and criticism. Did your grandmother understand this? Yes. She experienced similar dismissal in her life. She understood completely. Eleanor turned to Judge Chin. Your Honor, Rose Anderson didn't leave her estate to Emma because she was manipulated. She left it because Emma was the only family member who shared her entrepreneurial drive and actually built something meaningful. Rose Anderson wanted to support that. Objection, Marcus said. Speculation about the deceased's motivations. Sustained, Judge Chin said. Ms. Vasquez, stick to facts. Of course, Your Honor. Eleanor smiled. I'd like to call our first witness, Caroline Winters, co-founder of Sentinel Cybersecurity Solutions. Caroline walked in wearing a sharp navy suit. She'd flown in from San Francisco specifically for this hearing. After swearing in, Eleanor began her questions. Ms. Winters, how long have you known Emma Anderson? 8 years. We met in graduate school and founded Sentinel together. Can you describe Ms. Anderson's role in the company? Emma is our technical genius and CEO. She developed our core security protocols and has led every major client acquisition. Our success is directly attributable to her vision and execution. What is Sentinel's current valuation? Last quarter we were valued at $180 million. Gasps from the plaintiff's side. And Ms. Anderson's annual compensation? Last year, including salary, profit sharing, and dividends, approximately $23 million. Eleanor nodded. Has Ms. Anderson ever discussed her family with you? Yes. She told me they believed she was just my assistant. She found it easier than trying to convince them otherwise. Did she ever express intention to manipulate her grandmother? Never. She spoke about Rose Anderson with profound respect and gratitude. Rose was her mentor and confidant. Thank you, Ms. Winters. Marcus Webb stood for cross-examination. Ms. Winters, isn't it convenient that the defendant kept her success secret? That allowed her to appear vulnerable to her grandmother. Caroline fixed him with a cold stare. Emma kept her success secret from people who'd spent her entire life telling her she'd fail. That's self-protection, not manipulation. But Rose Anderson knew everything. She celebrated every milestone with Emma. The only people kept in the dark were those who'd earned that ignorance through decades of dismissal. Marcus sat down. Judge Chen called a brief recess. When we reconvened, Eleanor stood. Your Honor, the plaintiffs have questioned the legitimacy of Ms. Anderson's financial records. To address this definitively, I've asked Special Agent Torres from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division to testify. My parents exchanged confused glances. A man in a dark suit entered. Early 50s, graying hair, unmistakably federal law enforcement. After swearing in, Eleanor began. Agent Torres, can you explain your presence here today? I'm a special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation. I've been assigned to review Ms. Anderson's tax filings for the past 7 years. My mother gripped her purse tighter. What did your investigation find? Ms. Anderson's tax returns are completely accurate and legitimate. She's reported income of approximately $23 million annually for the past 7 years, paid all required taxes and maintained meticulous records. There is no evidence of fraud, tax evasion, or financial impropriety. Can you confirm the source of her income? Yes. Sentinel Cybersecurity Solutions, a properly registered and licensed corporation. The company has major contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies and 2 government agencies. All income is documented, verified, and taxed appropriately. Eleanor smiled. So when the plaintiff suggested Ms. Anderson's financial records might be fraudulent, they were completely wrong, Agent Torres said flatly. In fact, Ms. Anderson is one of the most compliant taxpayers I've reviewed. Everything is documented perfectly. Thank you, Agent Torres. Marcus Webb stood slowly. Agent Torres, isn't it unusual for the IRS to involve itself in a civil estate dispute? We don't typically. However, when someone's tax returns are called into question in legal proceedings, we may review them to prevent false allegations of tax fraud. In this case, Ms. Vasquez requested we confirm the legitimacy of her client's returns. And you found no issues? None whatsoever. Marcus sat back down looking deflated. Judge Chen made a note. Eleanor called her final witness, Robert Patterson, Grandma Rose's attorney. Mr. Patterson, you prepared Rose Anderson's final will. Can you describe her mental state? Sharp as a tack. She knew exactly what she wanted and why. Did she express her reasoning? Yes. She said Emma was the only grandchild who'd built something independently, who understood risk and entrepreneurship. She wanted to ensure Emma had the resources to continue building. Did she seem manipulated or confused? Absolutely not. She was decisive, clear, and firm in her choices. Thank you. Marcus Webb barely bothered with cross-examination. Judge Chen called a short recess before closing arguments. Eleanor's closing argument was brief and devastating. Your Honor, this case is based on a false premise, that Emma Anderson manipulated her grandmother. The evidence shows the opposite. Rose Anderson was a brilliant businesswoman who recognized similar brilliance in her granddaughter. She left her estate to Emma because Emma earned it, not through manipulation but through hard work, innovation, and the entrepreneurial spirit Rose valued above all else. She gestured toward my parents. The plaintiffs didn't know Emma's true success because they never bothered to look. They assumed, dismissed, and criticized. Rose Anderson saw what they refused to see: exceptional capability. The plaintiffs claim Emma hid her wealth to appear needy. The truth? She hid it to avoid exactly this kind of attack. And given their reaction to learning about her success, Immediate accusations of fraud rather than congratulations. Can anyone blame her? Rose Anderson made her choice with full knowledge, sound mind, and clear intention. This court should honor that choice. Marcus Webb's closing was desperate. Your Honor, the defendant deceived her entire family for years. That deception extends to her relationship with her grandmother. We may never know what lies she told, what manipulation occurred behind closed doors. The will should be voided and the estate distributed fairly. Judge Chen called for a brief recess to review the evidence. 15 minutes later we reconvened. Judge Chen looked tired but certain. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence. This court finds no evidence of undue influence, manipulation, or mental incompetency. Rose Anderson clearly understood her estate and made informed decisions about its distribution. My mother gasped. Furthermore, the evidence shows Emma Anderson did not deceive her grandmother. Rose Anderson was fully aware of Emma's financial success and celebrated it. The court cannot and will not rewrite a valid will simply because the plaintiffs disagree with the deceased's choices. Judge Chen's gaze hardened. However, I am troubled by the nature of this lawsuit. The plaintiffs have made serious allegations: fraud, manipulation, elder abuse, without evidence. They've questioned legitimate tax returns and business success, forcing unnecessary IRS involvement. This appears to be an attempt to intimidate the defendant into surrendering her inheritance. She paused. Therefore, I'm awarding sanctions against the plaintiffs. They will pay Ms. Anderson's legal fees, $127,000 to date, plus $50,000 in additional sanctions for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. The gavel came down. Case dismissed. My father's face went pale. My mother looked like she might faint. Kevin stared at the table. Ashley had tears running down her face. Marcus Webb gathered his papers quickly, avoiding eye contact with his clients. Judge Chen stood. This court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, my parents approached me. For a moment I thought they might apologize. You turned her against us, Mom said instead, her voice shaking. You poisoned Grandma's mind. I did nothing of the sort. Dad stepped closer. You're a liar and a manipulator. You always have been. I built a successful company, I said evenly. That's not manipulation. That's hard work. You hid it from us. Because you would have done exactly what you're doing now, attacked me for it. Kevin joined in. You think you're so superior with your millions and your... I never thought I was superior, I interrupted. I just wanted to work in peace. You made that impossible. Ashley wiped her eyes. How could you do this to family? I looked at each of them. I didn't do anything to you. Grandma Rose left you money. She left me more because she believed in what I was building. That was her choice, not mine. We'll appeal, Dad threatened. Eleanor stepped forward. I wouldn't recommend that. The next judge will see that you already lost once and had sanctions imposed. You'll likely face even steeper penalties. We don't need your advice, Mom snapped. Suit yourselves, Eleanor said pleasantly. But my client will seek additional sanctions if you pursue a frivolous appeal. We walked away, leaving them standing on the courthouse steps. In Eleanor's car, I finally let myself exhale. You okay? She asked. I will be. They might actually appeal, you know. Some people can't accept defeat. Let them. I have documentation for everything. Eleanor smiled. Yes, you do. I've never seen such meticulous records. You really are your grandmother's granddaughter. 2 weeks later, my parents paid the sanctions. They did not appeal. I never heard from them again. 6 months after the court case, I sat in my office, the real office at Sentinel's headquarters, reviewing quarterly numbers with Caroline. We're up 34% from last year, she said, pulling up charts. The government contracts are performing exceptionally. Good. And the new hires. Settling in well. Your grandmother would be proud. I smiled. Grandma Rose's inheritance had gone into a trust fund dedicated to cybersecurity education for underprivileged students. Young people who, like me, had potential that others dismissed. The fund was called the Rose Anderson Entrepreneurship Trust. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ashley. Mom had a stroke. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long moment, waiting to feel something. Guilt, concern, regret. Nothing came. I blocked the number and returned to work. Later that evening, I visited Grandma Rose's grave, something I did monthly. I brought fresh flowers and sat on the bench nearby. You were right about everything, I said quietly. About building something meaningful. About protecting it from people who'd try to tear it down. About choosing peace over proving myself to people who'd never believe in me anyway. The evening breeze rustled through the trees. Thank you for seeing me. For believing in me. For teaching me that success isn't about convincing doubters. It's about building something so undeniable they have to face their own blindness. I stood straightening the flowers. My phone rang. Caroline. We got it, she said, excitement clear in her voice. The Pentagon contract. $53 million over 3 years. I smiled. Grandma, we got the Pentagon contract. The words felt right, like she was still here, still mentoring, still believing. I walked back to my car. A new Tesla because I could afford it and didn't have to explain it to anyone anymore. My family had spent years telling me I'd fail, then years claiming I'd cheated when I succeeded, then months trying to take what I'd earned. They'd lost everything, the lawsuit, the money, and eventually me. I'd gained everything. My business, my freedom, and the validation from the one person whose opinion had ever mattered. As I drove away from the cemetery, I thought about Judge Chen's words. This court cannot and will not rewrite a valid will simply because the plaintiffs disagree with the deceased's choices. Grandma Rose had made her choice. I'd honored it. And I'd never apologize for that. 3 years later, Sentinel Cybersecurity Solutions went public. Opening day valuation, $890 million. Forbes featured me on their cover. The Quiet Billionaire, How Emma Anderson Built a Cybersecurity Empire in Silence. The article mentioned that I'd been estranged from my family for years by choice. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Some people spend their lives seeking approval from those who'll never give it. I'd spent mine building something undeniable. The people who mattered had always known my worth. The rest? They just tried to sue me for it.